When Marcus Wheeler shared half his meager turkey sandwich with a homeless stranger, he never imagined the billionaire watching from his luxury car would transform both their lives forever. The simple act of kindness on that autumn day unleashed a chain of events that would leave the struggling single father sobbing in the study of Chicago's most powerful real estate tycoon, his daughter's future secured, and his late wife's crushing medical debt erased in an instant. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The autumn air carried a sharp bite that morning as Marcus Wheeler pushed his cleaning cart down the gleaming marble hallway of Pinnacle Tower. His worn boots squeaked against the polished floor, a sound that had become as familiar to him as his own heartbeat over the past 6 years. The building was just beginning to stir with the early arrivals, ambitious executives and dedicated assistants preparing for another day of high-stakes business in downtown Chicago. Marcus checked his watch. 11:30 a.m. Lunch hour approached, and his stomach grumbled on cue. The thought of the turkey sandwich and apple he'd packed brought a small smile to his tired face. Simple food, but enough to keep him going through his shift. These days, every dollar mattered. "Morning, Mr. Wheeler," called Diane from the reception desk, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. She was one of the few who bothered to learn his name, to see past the gray janitor's uniform. "Morning, Diane," Marcus replied, tipping an imaginary hat her way. "Ready for another exciting day in paradise?" She laughed, the sound warm against the sterile corporate backdrop. "As ready as I'll ever be. You doing okay? How's Ellie?" At the mention of his daughter, Marcus's expression softened. "She's good. Got an A on her science project yesterday. Kid's smarter than I ever was, that's for sure. Takes after her dad, I bet," Diane winked, turning back to her computer as the phone began to ring. Marcus continued his rounds, the exchange lingering pleasantly in his mind. These small moments of human connection were threads of gold in the otherwise monotonous tapestry of his workday. Since losing his wife to cancer 3 years ago, raising 10-year-old Ellie alone, these brief conversations were sometimes all the adult interaction he got outside of parent-teacher conferences. By noon, Marcus had finished cleaning the executive bathrooms on the 35th floor. He wheeled his cart toward the service elevator, planning to head down to the small courtyard outside for his lunch break. The weather forecast had promised sunshine, a rare gift in late October, and he intended to soak up every ray before winter claimed the city. As the elevator doors opened onto the lobby, Marcus noticed a commotion near the entrance. 2 security guards were escorting someone out. A man in tattered clothes, his shoulders hunched in defeat. The homeless population had grown in the area, and Pinnacle Tower's management had a strict policy about loitering. Marcus slowed his pace, watching as the man was deposited outside the gleaming glass doors. Something in the slump of the stranger's shoulders struck a chord. Before his mind fully processed the decision, Marcus was wheeling his cart to the storage closet, grabbing his lunch bags and heading for the exit. Outside, autumn leaves spiraled down from the ornamental trees planted in perfect rows along the building's perimeter. Marcus spotted the man sitting on a concrete bench near the sidewalk, staring at his worn shoes. Up close, Marcus could see he wasn't as old as he'd first appeared, maybe mid-40s, with a beard that couldn't hide the hollows in his cheeks. "Mind if I sit?" Marcus asked, gesturing to the space on the bench. The man looked up, wariness etched in the lines around his eyes. He shrugged, sliding over slightly. Marcus settled beside him, unwrapping his sandwich. The man's gaze followed his movements, and Marcus saw hunger there, a familiar look he'd worn himself during the leaner months after medical bills had drained his savings. Without a word, Marcus broke the sandwich in half and offered a portion. The man hesitated, pride battling need. "I'm Marcus," he said simply, the sandwich still extended between them. "Ray," the man replied after a beat, accepting the offering with calloused hands. "Thanks." They ate in companionable silence, watching the parade of business suits and designer heels streaming in and out of the tower. A cool breeze rustled through the trees, sending a fresh cascade of yellow and amber leaves swirling around them. "Used to be an electrician," Ray said suddenly, brushing crumbs from his beard. "Had my own business. 3 employees. In a house in Evanston?" Marcus nodded. waiting for more. Wife got sick, Parkinson's. Insurance wouldn't cover the experimental treatments. Borrowed against the business, then the house. Ray's voice was matter-of-fact, devoid of self-pity. Lost everything when she died anyway. Funny how that works. Marcus felt a pang of recognition so sharp, it took his breath away. My wife, cancer, 3 years ago. Ray looked at him then, really looked at him, and a current of understanding passed between them. Two men who had watched helplessly as illness stole their wives and derailed their lives. Got kids? Marcus asked. Daughter, she's in California. Better off without her old man dragging her down. Ray's voice caught slightly. You? Daughter too. Ellie. She's 10. Smart as a whip, Marcus smiled, thinking of her gap-toothed grin that morning as she'd rattled off facts about the solar system. She's everything. Ray nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lip. Good, that's good. As they finished eating, Marcus reached into his bag and pulled out the apple, splitting it with his pocket knife and offering half to Ray. As they ate the crisp fruit, Marcus found himself sharing more about Ellie, about their small apartment, about his hopes to save enough for community college one day. Ray listened, offering occasional comments about his own daughter's childhood. Neither man noticed the sleek black car that had pulled up to the curb nearby, or the man who sat inside, watching their exchange with curious eyes. The businessman had been on a phone call, his driver waiting patiently as he finished negotiations for his latest acquisition. But something about the scene on the bench had caught his attention. The janitor in his grey uniform sharing a modest lunch with a homeless man. There was a dignity in the interaction that struck him, a simple human kindness that seemed increasingly rare in his world of ruthless deals and calculated relationships. Alexander Reed ended his call abruptly, his eyes still fixed on the two men. At 43, he had built Reed Enterprises into one of the most successful real estate development companies in the Midwest. His name adorned buildings across 3 states. His net worth had 8 zeros, and yet watching the janitor break bread with a stranger had stirred something long dormant within him. Sir? His driver's voice broke through his thought. Your 1 o'clock is in 15 minutes. Cancel it, Alexander said, his decision sudden but firm. Cancel everything for the rest of the day. Sir? The driver's surprise was evident in the rearview mirror. You heard me, James, Alexander replied, opening the car door. I need to speak with someone. As Alexander approached the bench, both men looked up, their conversation halting at the sight of the impeccably dressed stranger. His tailored navy suit and Italian leather shoes placed him firmly in the category of people who typically walked past them without a glance. Gentlemen, Alexander said, stopping before them. I hope I'm not interrupting. Marcus straightened, recognizing him immediately as one of the executives from the top floor. Not just any executive, but Alexander Reed himself, owner of the building and dozens like it across the city. No, sir, Marcus said, rising instinctively. Can I help you with something? Alexander smiled, a genuine expression that softened his usually stern features. Actually, I believe you might be able to, both of you. Ray remained seated, eyeing the newcomer with the natural suspicion of someone who had learned that attention from the wealthy rarely benefited people like him. My name is Alexander Reed, he said, extending his hand first to Marcus, then to a reluctant Ray. I know who you are, Mr. Reed, Marcus replied. I clean your office on Thursdays, and you do an excellent job, Alexander said, surprising Marcus with the acknowledgement. But I don't believe I know your name. Marcus Wheeler, sir. And this is Ray. Alexander nodded to both men. Mr. Wheeler, Ray, I was wondering if you might join me for a conversation. I have a proposition that could interest you both. Marcus and Ray exchanged a puzzled glance, uncertainty hanging in the air between them. I promise it won't take much of your time, Alexander continued, sensing their hesitation. And I think it could be worth your while. Little did Marcus know that this unexpected encounter would change the course of his life and Ray's forever. The real estate tycoon's decision, sparked by witnessing a simple act of kindness, was about to leave the single dad janitor in tears, but not for the reasons anyone might have expected. Marcus hesitated, glancing at his watch. His lunch break had only 5 minutes left, and abandoning his post could cost him his job, a risk he couldn't afford as Ellie's sole provider. I need to get back to work, Mr. Reed, he said apologetically. My shift. I've already spoken with your supervisor. Alexander interrupted smoothly, producing his phone. With a few taps, he made a brief call. "This is Reed. I need Marcus Wheeler excused from his duties for the remainder of the day. He's assisting me with a matter of personal importance. Yes, full pay, thank you." Marcus blinked in astonishment. "Sir, I appreciate that, but please..." Alexander gestured toward the black town car, idling at the curb. "1 hour of your time, that's all I ask." Ray stood up, brushing crumbs from his worn jacket. "This sounds like business between you two. I should get going." "Actually," Alexander said, "my proposition involves both of you. Please." Something in the businessman's tone, a note of genuine sincerity unusual in Marcus's experience with the building's executives, made him reconsider. He exchanged a look with Ray, who shrugged slightly, the universal gesture of a man with nowhere else to be. 1 hour. Marcus agreed cautiously. The interior of Alexander's car smelled of leather and subtle cologne. Marcus sat stiffly, acutely aware of his grey uniform against the cream-colored seats. Ray seemed equally uncomfortable, his hands folded tightly in his lap. James, the driver, navigated the downtown traffic with practiced ease as Alexander typed something on his tablet. "I owe you both an explanation," Alexander said finally, setting the device aside. "I watched your interaction just now, two strangers sharing a simple meal." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It reminded me of something I've lost touch with." Marcus waited, unsure how to respond. This wasn't the direction he'd expected the conversation to take. "I grew up poor," Alexander continued, surprising them. "Single mother, South Side. We knew what it meant to be hungry." His gaze drifted to the window, past the gleaming skyscrapers, to something only he could see. "When I started making money, I promised myself I'd never forget where I came from, that I'd give back." A rueful smile crossed his face. "Somewhere along the way, I broke that promise." The car turned into the underground parking of a building Marcus didn't recognize. As they exited the elevator into what appeared to be a private office suite, Marcus's confusion only deepened. "Reed Foundation," Alexander explained, noting Marcus's questioning look at the logo on the wall. "My charitable organization, or at least it was supposed to be." He led them into a spacious conference room where a middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair awaited them, folders arranged neatly before her. "Gentlemen, this is Margaret Chen, my foundation director," Alexander introduced. "Margaret, these are the gentlemen I mentioned." After brief introductions, they settled around the table, Ray shifting uncomfortably in the executive chair that probably cost more than all his possessions combined. "The Reed Foundation was established 5 years ago," Margaret began, her voice crisp and efficient. "Its mission was to provide housing and employment opportunities for vulnerable populations in Chicago. Unfortunately, over the past 2 years, our actual impact has diminished." Alexander's expression tightened. "What Margaret is too polite to say is that I've been neglecting the foundation. Donations continue, tax write-offs are taken, but meaningful work, that's been minimal at best." Marcus studied the man across the table. Alexander Reed's reputation was that of a ruthless businessman, not a philanthropist plagued by conscience. Yet here he was, admitting failure with surprising candor. "Sir," Marcus ventured, "I'm not sure what this has to do with us." Alexander leaned forward. "I want to reboot the foundation, not with corporate donations or charity galas, but with practical solutions developed by people who understand the real challenges." His gaze shifted between Marcus and Ray. "People like you," Ray barked a laugh, quick and disbelieving. "You want advice from a homeless guy and a janitor." "I want more than advice," Alexander replied, unfazed. "I want to offer you both jobs." Silence descended over the room as the two men processed his words. "What kind of jobs?" Marcus asked finally, his voice careful, measured. "For you, Mr. Wheeler, a position as community housing director. Your responsibility would be identifying families at risk of homelessness and coordinating support services. Salary commensurate with your experience, plus benefits." Alexander turned to Ray. "And for you, Ray, a role as outreach specialist, working directly with the homeless population you understand firsthand. Both positions include housing assistance." Marcus's mind reeled. The salary Alexander mentioned was nearly triple his current income. The benefits package alone would mean Ellie could see the specialist her pediatrician had recommended for her asthma. "Why us?" Ray asked, cutting through Marcus's thought. You don't know anything about us. I could be a con man. He could be incompetent. You're not, and he's not, Alexander stated with certainty. I've had security run a basic background check on both of you since our meeting. Standard procedure, he added, seeing Marcus's surprised expression. You, Mr. Wheeler, have worked at Pinnacle Tower for 6 years without a single complaint. Your supervisor describes you as reliable, thorough, and trustworthy. He turned to Ray. And you, Raymond Jeffries, owned Jeffries Electric for 15 years. Your business had an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau before its bankruptcy 3 years ago. Your former employees still speak highly of you. Ray's face registered shock at hearing his full name and the details of his past laid bare. But more important than your credential, Alexander continued, is what I witnessed today. Mr. Wheeler, you shared your lunch with a stranger when you barely had enough for yourself. And Ray, you spoke of your daughter with love and maintained your dignity despite circumstances that would break many men. Those qualities, compassion, resilience, integrity, can't be taught in business school. Margaret opened the folders before them, revealing employment contracts and housing information. This isn't charity, Alexander emphasized, seeming to sense their hesitation. This is a business decision. My foundation needs people with lived experience and practical wisdom. I'm offering fair compensation for valuable expertise. Marcus stared at the papers before him, his heart pounding. The opportunity was almost too perfect, a chance to provide Ellie with the stability he'd been fighting for since losing his wife. Yet years of disappointment had taught him to be wary of things that seemed too good to be true. What's the catch? He asked quietly. Alexander's expression softened. The catch, Mr. Wheeler, is that I expect results, real change for real people. If this experiment fails, the foundation might as well close its doors. I'm putting my reputation and significant resources behind your leadership. Ray leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. And what happens to us if it fails? We lose these fancy new jobs and end up right back where we started. A fair question, Alexander acknowledged, which is why both contracts include a 2-year guarantee clause. Even if the program doesn't meet expectations, your positions are secure for 24 months, providing ample time to transition. Marcus exchanged a look with Ray, seeing his own cautious hope reflected in the other man's eyes. For both of them, this represented more than employment. It was redemption, a chance to rebuild lives that had been shattered by circumstances beyond their control. We'll need time to think about it, Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. Alexander nodded. Of course, take the contracts home, review them. I'll need your decision by the end of the week. He stood, signaling the meeting's conclusion. In the meantime, Mr. Wheeler, you've been granted paid leave for the rest of the week to consider the offer. As James drove them back toward Pinnacle Tower, Marcus clutched the folder containing a future he'd never dared imagine. Beside him, Ray sat in contemplative silence, the weight of opportunity pressing upon them both. The key turned in the lock of apartment 3B with its familiar, stubborn resistance. Marcus shouldered the door open, his mind still swimming with the events of the afternoon. The small 2-bedroom apartment was quiet. Ellie wouldn't be home from after-school program for another hour. He placed the folder from Reed Foundation carefully on the kitchen table, as if it might disappear if handled too roughly. Marcus moved through his evening routine on autopilot, changing out of his uniform, starting dinner preparations, checking Ellie's homework folder. But his thoughts kept returning to Alexander Reed's unexpected offer. The contract, with its promise of stability and opportunity, felt like a lifeline thrown when he'd been barely treading water. After dropping Ray off at a shelter where the man had reluctantly agreed to stay while considering the offer, Marcus had promised to meet him tomorrow to discuss their options. Ray's parting words echoed in his mind. People like Reed don't do charity without wanting something in return. Question is, what's he really after? The sound of keys jingling outside the door pulled Marcus from his thoughts. Ellie burst in, her backpack bouncing against her small frame, cheeks flushed from the autumn chill. "Dad, you're home early!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around his waist. Her surprise was understandable. He was usually still at work when Mrs. Patel from next door dropped her off, Special day, pumpkin, Marcus smiled, hugging her tight. How was school? As Ellie chattered about her day, a science experiment with magnets, the upcoming Halloween parade, and lunch table politics that seemed as complex as any corporate boardroom, Marcus served the simple pasta dinner he'd prepared. He watched his daughter gesticulate wildly while describing her teacher's reaction to a classmate's joke, her gap-toothed smile lighting up her entire face. She had her mother's eyes, warm brown with flecks of gold that caught the light. Whenever she laughed, Marcus caught glimpses of Angela so strong it sometimes stole his breath. 3 years since cancer had taken her, and still, these moments could bring both healing and pain in equal measure. "Dad, are you listening?" Ellie's voice broke through his reverie. "Sorry, sweetheart. What were you saying?" "I said, why are you home early? Did something happen at work?" Her perceptiveness, also inherited from her mother, never failed to surprise him. Marcus took a deep breath. "Actually, yes, something did happen." He hesitated, unsure how much to share. "I might have an opportunity to change jobs. A better job, with better pay." Ellie's eyes widened. "Really? What kind of job?" "Working for a foundation that helps people who need homes and jobs," he explained simply. People like us, after Mom got sick. Remember how tough things were?" Ellie nodded solemnly. Even at 7, she had understood enough about their financial struggles after Angela's medical bills had drained their savings. The eviction notice, the move to this smaller apartment, Marcus taking the janitor position after his construction company downsized. She had weathered it all with a resilience that both broke his heart and filled him with pride. Would we have to move again?" she asked, a hint of worry creeping into her voice. "Maybe, but if we did, it would be to a better place. Maybe somewhere closer to your school." He reached across the table, covering her small hand with his. "Nothing's decided yet. It's just a possibility." After dinner and homework, after Ellie's bath and their nightly reading ritual, after tucking her in and kissing her forehead, Marcus finally returned to the kitchen table. He opened the folder and began to read the contract line by line, determined to understand every clause and implication. The position, Community Housing Director, would indeed pay nearly triple his current salary. The benefits package included comprehensive health insurance that would cover Ellie's asthma specialist and Angela's outstanding medical bills that still haunted his credit report. Most surprisingly, it included an education fund for Ellie that would grow with each year of his employment. The housing assistance component offered a subsidized 3-bedroom apartment in a building owned by Reed Enterprises, located in a neighborhood with top-rated schools. The rent would be adjusted based on his income, never exceeding 25% of his monthly earnings. It seemed too perfect, too tailored to address every struggle he'd faced since Angela's death. Ray's suspicion echoed in his mind. What was Reed really after? Marcus reached for his phone and dialed the number that had been included with the contract. "Margaret Chen speaking," came the crisp, professional voice after 2 rings. "Ms. Chen, this is Marcus Wheeler. I apologize for calling so late." "Not at all, Mr. Wheeler. I've been expecting your call." Something in her tone suggested she'd fielded similar late-night calls of disbelief before. "I have some questions about the offer," Marcus said. "Of course, that's why I'm here." Over the next hour, Margaret patiently addressed each of his concerns, explaining the foundation's structure, his potential responsibilities, and the accountability measures in place. Her straightforward answers slowly chipped away at his skepticism. "Mrs. Chen," Marcus finally asked, "why did Mr. Reed really choose us? The truth, please." There was a pause on the line, then a soft sigh. "Mr. Reed has been disconnected from the Foundation's mission for some time. His business success has been remarkable, but at a personal cost." Another pause. "Today, seeing you share your lunch with a stranger, it affected him deeply. I haven't seen him this engaged with the Foundation's work in years." "So we're what? His redemption project?" Marcus couldn't keep the edge from his voice. "You're his wake-up call," Margaret corrected gently. "Indeed, and perhaps an opportunity for him as much as for you." She let that sink in before continuing. "Mr. Wheeler, regardless of Alexander's personal journey, the Foundation's mission is real, and these positions are genuine. The question is not why he's offering this opportunity, but whether you want to seize it." After ending the call, Marcus sat at the kitchen table long into the night, weighing his option. The janitor position had been steady, if unexciting. It had seen him and Ellie through the worst years after Angela's death. There was comfort in its predictability, but comfort wasn't enough anymore. Ellie deserved more than survival. She deserved opportunities, security, a future not constrained by financial hardship. And perhaps Marcus himself deserved more than endless days of invisible labor, more than being overlooked by the very people whose spaces he maintained. Near midnight, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "It's Ray. Got your number from Reed's driver. You decide in tonight," Marcus typed back, leaning toward yes, you. The response came quickly, "Scared as hell. But what do I have to lose?" Marcus smiled slightly at the simple truth in those words. He sent back, "Meet tomorrow morning, coffee shop across from Pinnacle, 9 a.m. I'll be there." Marcus looked up from his phone, his gaze falling on a photograph of Angela on the refrigerator. She was laughing, her head thrown back, sunlight catching in her dark curls. The last good summer before her diagnosis. "And what would you do, Ang?" he whispered to the empty kitchen. In the silence, he could almost hear her voice. "Practical, loving, brave. Take the leap, Marcus. You've been standing on the edge long enough." With a deep breath, he closed the folder. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter for him and Ellie. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Hope. The coffee shop across from Pinnacle Tower buzzed with the morning rush, executives and assistants grabbing caffeine before disappearing into the gleaming skyscraper. Marcus arrived at 8:45 a.m., surprised to find Ray already there, seated at a corner table with 2 steaming cups. "Figured you'd take it black," Ray said by way of greeting, pushing 1 cup toward Marcus as he sat down. Marcus nodded his thanks, noting the subtle changes in Ray's appearance. His beard was trimmed, his face freshly washed, his clothes still worn but noticeably cleaner. The shelter had done him good, even for just 1 night. "Sleep on it?" Ray asked, his eyes betraying his own restless night. "Yeah," Marcus wrapped his hands around the warm cup. "You?" "First real bed in months. Hardly knew what to do with myself." Ray's attempt at humor couldn't quite mask the vulnerability beneath it. So, what's your thinking?" Marcus took a sip of coffee before answering. "I'm going to take it. For Ellie. For myself too, I guess." Ray nodded slowly. "Called my daughter last night." The statement hung in the air, laden with meaning. Marcus waited, giving Ray space to continue. "First time in over a year," Ray admitted, his voice rough. "She cried. I cried. Told her about the offer. He thinks I should take it." "What do you think?" Marcus asked quietly. Ray's weathered hands fidgeted with a sugar packet. 3 years on the streets changes a man, Marcus. Makes you forget who you were before. This job, it's like someone offering to give me back my old self." He looked up, his gaze direct and unflinching. "Problem is, I'm not sure that man exists anymore." "Maybe that's not a bad thing," Marcus suggested. "Maybe the man you are now, the one who survived losing everything, is exactly the right person for this job." Something shifted in Ray's expression, a flicker of recognition, perhaps even hope. "We doing this then?" Ray asked. "We're doing this." They clinked their coffee cups in a makeshift toast, a pact between unlikely allies stepping into an uncertain future. The Reed Foundation offices were housed in a renovated warehouse in the West Loop, all exposed brick and industrial windows softened by modern furnishings. When Marcus and Ray arrived, Margaret Chen greeted them with a restrained smile that didn't quite conceal her relief. "Alexander will be pleased," she said, leading them to her office to sign the contracts. "He's invested more personally in this initiative than any project in years." "Where is he?" Marcus asked, noticing the businessman's absence. "Board meeting at Reed Enterprises. He sends his regards and will meet with you both on Monday to discuss your first assignments." She handed them each a pen. "Today is about paperwork and logistics." The morning disappeared in a blur of signatures, tax forms, and orientation materials. By noon, they were officially employees of the Reed Foundation, with employee badges and foundation email addresses that felt surreal to both men. After lunch, catered sandwiches that made their shared meal from yesterday seem like a distant memory. Margaret introduced them to a petite woman with bright eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Sophia Torres, our housing coordinator," Margaret explained. "I shall be handling your living arrangements." "Pleasure to meet you both," Sophia said briskly, opening her tablet. "Mr. Wheeler, we have a 3-bedroom unit available in our West Side Heights property, fully renovated last year, walking distance to Lincoln Elementary, which I understand is your daughter's school." Marcus nodded, still processing the speed at which his life was changing. "Ray," Sophia continued, "we have a studio apartment in the same building. It's modest but comfortable. Both units are available immediately." "Immediately," Ray echoed. "As in today?" "As in whenever you're ready," Sophia clarified. "We can arrange moving services for your belongings." "Won't need that," Ray interrupted with a humorless laugh. "Everything I own is in a backpack at the shelter." An uncomfortable silence fell, broken by Marcus. "I'll need the weekend to pack our things. It's not much, but Ellie will want to say goodbye to the neighbors." Sophia nodded understandingly. "Of course. Monday then for both of you. I can have the keys ready tomorrow if you'd like to see the spaces before moving in." As the day progressed, the reality of their situation began to settle. They were given a tour of the foundation, introduced to the small but dedicated staff, and briefed on current initiatives. By late afternoon, both men were overwhelmed with information and emotion. "One last thing," Margaret said, as they prepared to leave. She handed each of them an envelope. "Your signing bonuses, standard for foundation executives." Marcus opened the envelope, his breath catching at the check inside. $5,000, more money than he'd seen at once since before Angela's illness. "This wasn't in the contract," he said, looking up at Margaret with confusion. "Alexander's addition this morning," she explained. He thought you might need resources for the transition." Outside, as the autumn sun began its early descent, Marcus and Ray stood on the sidewalk, each holding an envelope that represented not just money, but a bridge between their past lives and whatever waited ahead. "Feels like I'm dreaming," Ray admitted. "Keep expecting to wake up back on that bench." Marcus understood completely. "Where will you stay until Monday?" "Shelter again, I guess." Marcus hesitated only briefly. "I have a pull-out couch. It's not much, but it's yours until we move if you want it." Ray looked at him, surprise giving way to gratitude. "You sure? Your daughter would love to meet the man who's changing our lives alongside us." Marcus finished for him. "Besides, might be good for her to understand where we've been and where we're going." No sugarcoating. That evening, in the small apartment that had been both haven and prison for the past 3 years, Ellie set the table for 3. Her initial shyness around Ray lasted approximately 5 minutes before she bombarded him with questions about his life as an electrician. "So you know how to fix anything with wires?" she asked, eyes wide over her plate of spaghetti. Ray smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Just about. Been doing it since I was not much older than you. Our lights flicker sometimes," Ellie informed him seriously. "Dad says it's the building wiring." "Probably is," Ray agreed. "These old buildings, they weren't designed for all the gadgets we use nowadays." "Could you fix it?" she persisted. "Ellie," Marcus cautioned, "Mr. Ray is our guest, not our handyman." "It's okay," Ray said, the smile still playing at his lip. "I'll tell you what, kiddo, after dinner I'll take a look. No promises, but maybe I can make those lights behave a little better later." As Ray inspected the fuse box in the hallway while Ellie held a flashlight, Marcus packed dishes in the kitchen, occasionally catching snippets of Ray's patient explanations about circuits and loads. Something about the scene, this man who had lost everything now teaching his daughter, both of them illuminated by the narrow beam of a flashlight, struck Marcus as profoundly important, though he couldn't have explained exactly why. When Ellie was finally in bed, the 2 men sat in the small living room, nursing mugs of instant coffee. "She's something special, your girl," Ray said quietly. "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "Her mother would be proud." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the city and the now steady hum of the apartment lights that Ray had indeed managed to fix. "You know," Ray said finally, "whatever Reed's real reasons for doing this, I'm grateful. Not just for the job or the apartment." He looked directly at Marcus, "for the chance to be useful again." Marcus nodded, understanding completely. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," Ray agreed. Neither man knew that across town, Alexander Reed sat alone in his penthouse office, staring at a photograph of two young boys standing beside a tired-looking woman in front of a run-down apartment building. One of the boys, clearly a younger Alexander, had his arm protectively around the smaller child, a brother Marcus and Ray knew nothing about, a debt unpaid, a promise long forgotten. Until yesterday, the weekend passed in a flurry of cardboard boxes and packing tape. Marcus had accumulated surprisingly little in their years at the apartment. Angela's illness had taught him to distinguish between necessities and luxuries, and the tight budget afterward had reinforced the lesson. Still, each item they packed represented a memory, a chapter in their small family's story. Ellie approached the move with the resilient adaptability of childhood, excited about her new room and the prospect of living in the same building as Ray, whom she had quickly adopted as an honorary uncle. She carefully wrapped her science fair trophies and the framed photograph of her mother that stood beside her bed, chattering about how she would arrange her new space. "Do you think there'll be other kids in the building?" she asked, helping Marcus tape a box of kitchen items. "I'm sure there will be," he replied, smiling at her enthusiasm. Sophia mentioned that several families live there. "What if they don't like me?" The question came softly, revealing the vulnerability beneath her excitement. Marcus set down the packing tape and knelt before his daughter, gently tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "Nellie Wheeler, you are the kindest, smartest, funniest kid I know. Anyone who doesn't see that isn't looking hard enough." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer, and returned to her task. But the question lingered in Marcus's mind. This move represented more than a change of address. It was a step into a new social circle, a different economic class. Would they belong? Would Ellie face subtle exclusions or judgments because of where they'd come from? Ray arrived Sunday afternoon to help with the final packing. He'd spent Saturday at the shelter, donating most of his meager possessions to other residents. "Figured they needed the stuff more than I do," he'd explained simply. Fresh start means fresh everything. As the three of them worked, the apartment gradually transformed from a home back into an empty space. By evening, the living room was filled with stacked boxes, the walls bare except for the nail holes that had once held family photos. "I ordered pizza," Marcus announced, wiping dust from his hands. "Last meal in the old place should be something special." They sat on the floor among the boxes, paper plates balanced on their knees, the familiar comfort of pizza softening the strangeness of their stripped-down surrounding. "Would you know what this reminds me of?" Ray said between bites. "First night in my house after I started the business. Had no furniture yet, just a sleeping bag and a toolbox. Ordered pizza, sat on the floor, and felt like the king of the world." "Were you scared?" Ellie asked, picking off a mushroom. Ray considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Terrified," he admitted, "but the good kind of terrified. Like standing at the top of a roller coaster, scared but excited to see what comes next." Ellie nodded solemnly. "That's how I feel. Scared-sighted." "Scared-sighted," Marcus repeated, smiling at his daughter's perfect neologism. "That's exactly it, pumpkin." Later, after Ellie had fallen asleep in her sleeping bag on the bare floor of her room, Marcus and Ray sat in the kitchen, sharing the last beer in the otherwise empty refrigerator. "Thanks," Marcus said quietly, "for everything these past few days. Ellie adores you." Ray shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Kid makes it easy. Reminds me of my Leah at that age. Curious about everything. No filter." His expression softened at the memory. "Called her again today. She's thinking about visiting at Christmas." "That's great, Ray." "Yeah." Ray took a slow sip of beer. "Still doesn't feel real. You know? Keep waiting for the other shoe to drop." Marcus understood the sentiment perfectly. "What do you make of Reed? His real motivation?" Ray considered the question. "Man like that, with his kind of money and power, could be anything. Guilty conscience, tax write-off, PR stunt." He paused. "Or maybe exactly what he says, wanting to reconnect with his roots, make a difference." "You believe that?" "I want to," Ray admitted. "After everything, I need to believe someone can just do the right thing because it's right." The moving truck arrived at 8 the next morning, another service arranged by the foundation. By noon, they were standing in the lobby of Westside Heights, a modern six-story building with a facade of warm brick and large windows. The interior featured polished concrete floors, exposed ductwork, and a wall of living plants that gave the space an unexpected vibrancy. Sophia greeted them with keys and welcome packets. "Third floor for you, Marcus and Ellie. Ray, you're on 4. The elevator is just around the corner, and there's a rooftop garden that's open to all residents. The building has secure entry, 24-hour maintenance, and a small gym in the basement." Ellie clutched her backpack straps, wide-eyed at the lobby's sleek elegance. "This is where we live now," she whispered to Marcus. "This is it, Pumpkin," he confirmed, feeling a similar sense of disbelief. The movers efficiently transported their boxes to their respective apartment. Marcus and Ellie's new home was larger than he had imagined. 3 bedrooms with large windows, an open kitchen with new appliances, and a living room that could comfortably fit twice the furniture they owned. Ellie raced from room to room, claiming the bedroom with the window seat as her own. "Dad, come see. I can see the whole city from here." Marcus joined her at the window, taking in the view of Chicago's skyline in the distance. The perspective was different here. They were looking at the city not from the margins, but as part of the landscape. It was a powerful metaphor for their changing circumstances. Ray's studio apartment, though smaller, was equally impressive. Modern and efficient, with a Murphy bed that disappeared into the wall and built-in storage that maximized the space. The kitchenette gleamed with new appliances, and the bathroom featured a walk-in shower with multiple jets. "Nicer than my old house," Ray commented, running his hand along the granite countertop. "Hell of a lot nicer than the shelter." They spent the afternoon unpacking essentials, the reality of their situation becoming more tangible with each item placed in its new home. By evening, both apartments had taken on the first hints of personality. Ellie's books arranged on a shelf, Ray's few photographs displayed on his windowsill, Marcus's mother's quilt draped over the new couch that had been waiting for them upon arrival. As twilight settled over the city, Marcus stood on the small balcony off the living room, a mug of coffee warming his hands against the October chill. Tomorrow would bring their first official day of work at the foundation, the true beginning of this new chapter. The mixture of gratitude, anxiety, and determination he felt was complex, but underneath it all ran a current of something that had been absent for too long: purpose. The buzzing of his phone interrupted his thoughts. An unknown number. "Hello, Mr. Wheeler." Alexander Reed's voice was instantly recognizable. "None, I trust the move went smoothly." "Yes, sir. Everything's been incredible. Thank you." "No need for thanks. You've earned this opportunity." There was a brief pause. "I'll see you both tomorrow at the foundation, 9 a.m. We have important work to begin." After hanging up, Marcus remained on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker to life in the gathering darkness. Somewhere in that glittering landscape, Alexander Reed was preparing for tomorrow as well. His motives still a mystery, but his impact on their lives undeniable. Whatever came next, Marcus was ready to face it. Scared-sighted, as Ellie would say, a perfect word for a new beginning. The Reed Foundation occupied the top 2 floors of the renovated warehouse, the morning light streaming through the industrial windows, casting geometric patterns across the polished concrete floors. Marcus and Ray arrived together at 8:45 a.m., both dressed in the best clothes they owned. Marcus in khakis and a button-down shirt that had once been his parent-teacher conference outfit. Ray in dark jeans and a sweater purchased the previous day with part of his signing bonus. They were directed to a large conference room where coffee and pastries waited. The wall of windows offered a sweeping view of the city, the skyscrapers of downtown Chicago gleaming in the distance. "Nice digs," Ray muttered, helping himself to coffee. "Bit different from the back of a shelter." Marcus nodded, adjusting his collar nervously. Despite the contract, despite the apartment, despite everything that had happened in the whirlwind of the past 4 days, part of him still expected to wake up and find himself pushing a cleaning cart through Pinnacle Tower. At precisely 9, Alexander Reed entered, followed by Margaret Chen and 3 other people they hadn't met. Where Alexander had been casually dressed during their first encounter, today he wore a tailored charcoal suit that Marcus suspected cost more than his old annual salary. Marcus, Ray, Alexander greeted them warmly, shaking their hands. "Welcome to your first day. I trust the apartments are satisfactory?" "More than satisfactory," Marcus assured him. "Ellie's over the moon about her new room." Alexander's expression softened at the mention of Ellie. "I'm glad to hear it. Children deserve stability." There was something in his tone, a momentary vulnerability that vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by his businessman's efficiency. "Let me introduce the rest of our executive team," Alexander continued, gesturing to the others. "You've met Margaret, our foundation director. This is Carlos Vega, our legal counsel, Dr. Amara Okafor, our research director, and Jason Kim, our finance director." After brief introductions, they settled around the conference table. The atmosphere was professional, but not stiff. These were clearly people accustomed to working together. "Before we discuss specific projects," Alexander began, "I want to share some context about the Foundation's mission and how your roles fit into our overall strategy." What followed was a comprehensive overview of the Reed Foundation's history and current initiatives. Founded 5 years ago with a $50 million endowment from Alexander's personal fortune, the foundation focused on housing security and economic opportunity in Chicago's underserved communities. Their flagship program, Pathways to Stability, had initially shown promising results, providing transitional housing and job training to families at risk of homelessness. However, Alexander admitted, his expression tightening, over the past 2 years, our impact has diminished. We've become, he paused, searching for the right word, institutionalized, disconnected from the communities we serve. Dr. Okafor nodded in agreement. Our approach has been too top-down. We design programs based on data and theory, but without sufficient input from the people actually experiencing these challenges. Which is why you're here, Alexander concluded, looking directly at Marcus and Ray. You bring perspectives and insights that everyone in this room, myself included, simply doesn't have. We need your lived experience to reshape our approach. The directness of his statement was both flattering and intimidating. Marcus glanced at Ray, seeing his own mix of emotions reflected in the older man's face. "So what exactly will we be doing?" Ray asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. "Excellent question," Alexander replied, nodding to Margaret, who distributed tablets to everyone at the table. "These contain your first assignments," she explained. "Ray, as outreach specialist, you'll be evaluating our current methods for connecting with homeless individuals and families. We want you to identify gaps, inefficiencies, and opportunities for improvement based on your experience." Ray accepted the tablet with a look of determination. "Marcus," Margaret continued, "as Community Housing Director, your initial focus will be assessing our existing housing units and policies. Are they truly meeting the needs of families like yours? What barriers might we be overlooking?" The magnitude of the responsibility settled over Marcus. They weren't just token hires. They were being entrusted with reshaping the Foundation's core strategy. "We'll start with a 2-week orientation period," Alexander added. "You'll meet with each department, tour our properties, and familiarize yourselves with our current program. After that, we'll expect your initial assessments and recommendations." The meeting continued with more specific discussions about budgets, reporting structures, and immediate priorities. Throughout it all, Marcus observed the dynamics among the executive team. They respected Alexander, that much was clear, but there was also a comfortable candor in their interactions that suggested this wasn't a typical hierarchical corporate environment. As the meeting concluded, Alexander asked Marcus and Ray to remain behind. When the others had filed out, he closed the door and returned to his seat, his demeanor shifting subtly. "I want to be completely transparent with you both," he began, clasping his hands on the table. "This initiative bringing you onto the executive team was not unanimously supported. Some board members were concerned about your lack of formal qualifications or experience in philanthropy." Marcus tensed, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "I overrode those concerns," Alexander continued, "because I believe conventional qualifications are precisely what's limited our effectiveness." But he leaned forward, his gaze intense. "This means you'll be under scrutiny. There are those who expect you to fail, who are waiting for me to admit this was a misguided experiment." So we're guinea pigs, Ray stated bluntly. Alexander didn't flinch at the characterization. In a sense, yes, but guinea pigs in an experiment I believe in wholeheartedly. More importantly, an experiment that could change countless lives if successful. Marcus considered this. What happens if we do fail? If our recommendations don't work, then we learn from it and adjust. Alexander replied without hesitation. This isn't about proving anyone right or wrong. It's about finding better ways to help people who need it. There was a sincerity in his voice that was difficult to dismiss. Whatever his ulterior motives might be, and Marcus still suspected there were some, his commitment to the Foundation's mission seemed genuine. After the meeting, Margaret led them on a tour of the Foundation's facilities, introducing them to staff members and explaining various operations. The team was diverse and dedicated, many having chosen non-profit work over more lucrative opportunities elsewhere. Most of our staff could earn twice as much in the private sector, Margaret noted, as they observed the research team analyzing data from recent initiatives. They're here because they believe in what we're doing. By lunchtime, Marcus's head was swimming with information. As they sat in the Foundation's small cafeteria, he and Ray compared notes on their initial impressions. "What do you think?" Marcus asked, unwrapping his sandwich. Ray considered the question, his expression thoughtful. "I think they're actually serious about this. About us." He nodded toward a group of staff members engaged in animated discussion across the room. "These people could be making big money elsewhere, but they're here trying to solve problems most folks pretend don't exist." Marcus had reached a similar conclusion. The Foundation's work was imperfect, perhaps even inefficient in places, but the commitment was real. "And Reed?" he prompted. Ray shrugged. "Still can't figure him out completely, but whatever his reasons, he's putting real resources behind this." As they continued their tour that afternoon, Marcus found himself increasingly engaged with the Foundation's mission. The challenges were daunting: systemic poverty, housing insecurity, economic inequality, but the possibility of contributing meaningful solutions was exhilarating. By the end of the day, when Alexander stopped by to check on their progress, Marcus had already filled pages of notes with observations and questions. "Productive first day?" Alexander asked. "Very," Marcus confirmed. "Though I think I've got more questions now than when I started." Alexander smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face. "That's exactly how it should be. The people who worry me are the ones who think they already have all the answers." As they prepared to leave, Alexander handed each of them a business card. "My personal number," he explained. "Day or night, if you need anything or have questions, call me directly." The gesture was unexpected, a CEO making himself personally available to new employees. As they rode the elevator down to the street level, Ray examined the card thoughtfully. "You know what I still can't figure out?" he said. "Why us specifically? Of all the janitors and homeless guys in Chicago, why pick us?" Marcus had been wondering the same thing. Maybe it really was just chance. Right place, right time. Ray pocketed the card with a skeptical expression. Maybe there's more to this story than we know. The first week at the Reed Foundation passed in a blur of meetings, property tours, and deep dives into program data. Marcus and Ray immersed themselves in understanding the Foundation's operations, both impressed by the scope of its ambitions and increasingly aware of its shortcomings. Ray's natural skepticism proved valuable as he questioned practices that Foundation staff had long taken for granted. During a presentation on the shelter outreach program, he interrupted the coordinator's polished slideshow. "You're telling me outreach workers visit shelters between 9 and 5 Monday through Friday?" he asked incredulously. "Yes, that's our standard operating procedure," the coordinator confirmed. Ray shook his head. "So you're missing everyone who works during those hours, and you're missing weekend intake, which is when most new people arrive at shelters after being evicted on Fridays." His voice carried the weight of experience. "No wonder your engagement numbers are low." The meeting room fell silent, the coordinator's expression shifting from surprise to chagrin. "That's an excellent point," Margaret acknowledged. That's one we completely overlooked. Similar revelations occurred throughout the week as Marcus and Ray brought their lived experiences to bear on the Foundation's work. Marcus identified flaws in the family housing application process that created unnecessary barriers for working parents. Ray pointed out that the Foundation's shelter funding prioritized overnight accommodations but neglected daytime services, leaving many homeless individuals with nowhere to go during business hours. Each evening, they returned to their new apartments energized but exhausted, the responsibility of their roles becoming increasingly apparent. For Marcus, the adjustment extended beyond work. Ellie was thriving in their new home, but the balancing act of single fatherhood and executive responsibility presented daily challenges. On Thursday evening, after tucking Ellie into bed, Marcus found an unexpected visitor at his door. Alexander Reed himself, casually dressed in jeans and a sweater that somehow still looked expensive. "I hope I'm not intruding," Alexander said, holding up a bottle of scotch. "I thought you might welcome a drink after your first week in the trenches." Surprised but curious, Marcus invited him in. The sight of the billionaire real estate developer in his modest living room was surreal, like finding a lion lounging in your kitchen. Alexander poured 2 glasses of amber liquid and settled into the armchair across from Marcus. "So," he said, "honest assessment, how are we doing?" The directness of the question caught Marcus off guard. He took a sip of scotch, buying time to formulate his response. The alcohol burned pleasantly, warming his chest. "The Foundation has good intentions," he began carefully, "and significant resources. But we're missing the mark in crucial ways," Alexander finished for him. "That's what I suspected." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Tell me what you've found." For the next hour, Marcus shared his observations candidly, the disconnect between program design and actual needs, the well-meaning but sometimes counterproductive policies, the opportunities for more effective intervention. Alexander listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly absorbing Marcus's insights without defensiveness. "What about you?" Marcus finally asked, emboldened by the scotch and the unusual intimacy of the conversation. "Why is this so important to you personally?" Alexander's expression changed subtly, a guardedness replacing his earlier openness. He studied his glass for a moment before responding. "I grew up poor," he said, repeating what he'd told them during their first meeting. "My mother worked 3 jobs. Sometimes we had electricity, sometimes we didn't. Sometimes we had dinner, sometimes we didn't." He took a slow sip of scotch. "What I didn't mention was that I had a younger brother, Michael." Marcus remained silent, sensing they were approaching the heart of the mystery. "Michael was brilliant," Alexander continued, his voice softening with memory. "Smarter than me, kinder than me, but he was also more sensitive. The constant instability affected him differently." He paused, the weight of the past visibly settling over him. "When I was 18, I got a scholarship to Northwestern, my ticket out. I promised Michael I'd come back for him, that I'd make enough money to take care of him and our mother." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken grief. "What happened to him?" Marcus finally asked. Alexander's jaw tightened. "Life happened. I got busy with college, then my first real estate deal. Months passed without visits, then years." His voice grew distant. "By the time I made my first million, Michael was living on the streets. Mental health issues, substance abuse. The details aren't important. What matters is that I was too late." He set his glass down with careful precision. "He died 15 years ago, froze to death on a bench, not unlike the one where I saw you and Ray." The revelation landed like a stone in still water, ripples of understanding spreading through Marcus's consciousness. This wasn't just philanthropy, it was penance. "I'm sorry," Marcus said simply. Alexander nodded, accepting the condolence. "The truth is, Marcus, I've built an empire of buildings, but I failed at the one thing that truly mattered, protecting my brother." His eyes, when they met Marcus's, were clear and determined. "The Foundation is my attempt to do for others what I couldn't do for Michael, but it wasn't enough to throw money at the problem. I needed people who understood it from the inside." "And then you saw us," Marcus said. the pieces finally clicking into place. And then I saw you, Alexander confirmed. A janitor sharing his lunch with a homeless man. Two strangers connecting across the divide that separated my brother and me. He shook his head slightly, as if still processing the coincidence. It felt like, I don't know, a second chance. Maybe. The conversation shifted after that, moving to lighter topics. Ellie's adjustment to their new home, the Foundation's upcoming initiatives, the challenges of Chicago's approaching winter for those still on the streets. By the time Alexander left, shortly after 10, Marcus felt he had glimpsed the man behind the billionaire facade, a man still haunted by a brother he couldn't save. The next morning, Marcus shared Alexander's revelation with Ray as they commuted to the Foundation together. Makes sense, Ray said thoughtfully. Explains why he's so personally invested in this. Does it change how you feel about the job? Marcus asked. Ray considered the question. Makes me respect him more, actually. Man's trying to make amends. Can't fault him for that. He paused. Still doesn't mean this whole thing will work, though. But you want it to, Marcus observed. Yeah, Ray admitted. I really do. They arrived at the Foundation to find Margaret waiting for them, her expression unusually serious. We have a situation, she announced without preamble. The West Side shelter is being shut down due to code violation. 87 residents will be displaced as of Monday morning. Ray straightened, immediately alert. That's Robbie's shelter. Where are they sending people? That's just it, Margaret replied. There's no plan. The city claims other shelters have capacity, but we know that's not true. Not with winter coming. What can we do? Marcus asked. Margaret's gaze shifted between them. That's what Alexander wants to know. He's called an emergency meeting. This is your first real test, not as some abstract exercise, but with real lives at stake. As they followed her to the conference room, Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle more firmly on his shoulders. This wasn't about impressing Alexander or justifying their positions anymore. This was about people, like Ray had been just days ago, with nowhere to go as Chicago's brutal winter approached. The theoretical had become urgently, undeniably real. The conference room buzzed with urgent energy as the Foundation's executive team huddled around the large table. Maps of Chicago's west side were projected on screens, alongside spreadsheets detailing shelter capacities and weather forecasts predicting an early cold snap. Alexander stood at the head of the table, his typical composed demeanor replaced by focused intensity. We have 72 hours to find solutions for 87 people, he stated. I want options. The team launched into a rapid-fire discussion of possibilities: emergency funding to address the code violations, temporary shelters in churches or community centers, accelerating the opening of a foundation-backed housing project scheduled for completion next month. Marcus listened intently, noting how quickly the Foundation could mobilize resources when motivated, but something about the approach felt fundamentally flawed. May I? He interrupted during a debate about hotel vouchers. All eyes turned to him expectantly. We're thinking about this as a logistics problem, Marcus said. Moving people from point A to point B. But we're forgetting that these are 87 individuals with different needs, different circumstances. Ray nodded in agreement. Some have jobs they need to stay close to. Some have medical conditions that require specific accommodations. Some have children in local schools. What are you suggesting? Alexander asked, his expression thoughtful. Marcus exchanged a glance with Ray before continuing. If instead of one big solution, we need multiple targeted approaches, and we need to involve the residents themselves in the planning. Ray leaned forward. I know most of the guys at Westside, worked alongside some of them at day labor sites. If we could get in there today, talk to them directly. Do it, Alexander decided immediately. Take whatever resources you need. 3 hours later, Marcus and Ray walked through the doors of Westside Shelter, accompanied by Dr. Okafor and a small team from the Foundation. The facility was housed in a former elementary school, its institutional architecture softened by years of community use. Despite the impending closure, the atmosphere inside was surprisingly calm. The residents had weathered too many crises to panic over one more. The shelter director, Robbie Washington, met them in what had once been the school cafeteria. A large man with kind eyes and a voice that commanded respect. He greeted Ray with a bear hug. Man, look at you, Robbie exclaimed, holding Ray at arm's length to examine his new clothes. Heard you hit the jackpot. Something like that, Ray replied with a small smile. I wish I was visiting under better circumstances. Yeah, well, Robbie's expression sobered. City inspectors found mold in the basement and electrical issues. Building owner says repairs would cost more than the place is worth. How are residents taking the news? Marcus asked. Robbie gestured around the cafeteria where men and women of varying ages sat at tables, some playing cards, others reading or simply staring into space. Some have options, friends, couches, other shelters. Most don't. With Robbie's assistance, they set up an impromptu office in a corner of the cafeteria. One by one, shelter residents came to speak with them, sharing their specific circumstances and needs. Marcus and Dr. Okafor documented each case, while Ray's familiar presence helped ease initial wariness. A pattern quickly emerged. About 20 residents had jobs, but insufficient income for market-rate housing. 15 had medical conditions requiring regular treatment at specific facilities. 12 were families with children in local schools. The remaining 40 were individuals with varying challenges, substance abuse issues, mental health concerns, or simply the grinding poverty that made any stability feel out of reach. We need categories of solutions, Marcus observed after several hours of interviews. Housing plus supports based on specific needs. By late afternoon, they had developed a preliminary plan. The foundation would lease a small apartment building that had been on the market for months, one of Reed Enterprises' properties, to provide immediate housing for the families and employed individuals. A partnership with a local health clinic would ensure continuity of care for those with medical needs, and the foundation's existing shelter network would be temporarily reconfigured to accommodate the remaining individuals, with transportation provided to maintain access to jobs and services. When they presented the plan to Alexander that evening, his expression shifted from concern to cautious optimism. This is remarkably comprehensive, he acknowledged, but the costs are significant, Marcus admitted. But compare them to the long-term costs of disrupting lives already hanging by a thread. People losing jobs because they can't get to work, kids falling behind in school due to constant relocation, medical conditions worsening without consistent care. Alexander studied the budget projections. You're making an investment case. Yes, Marcus confirmed. These aren't just expenses. They're investments in stability that pay dividends down the road. Alexander's gaze shifted to Ray. Your thoughts? It's solid, Ray said simply. Addresses real needs, not just symptoms. Most importantly, it treats people like people, not problems to be shuffled around. The conference room fell silent as Alexander considered their proposal. Finally, he nodded decisively. Make it happen, he instructed Margaret. Whatever resources they need. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of activity. Marcus barely saw Ellie, relying heavily on a neighbor in their building who had offered to help with after-school care. Ray worked tirelessly alongside the shelter staff, his first-hand knowledge of life on the streets proving invaluable as they coordinated the complex logistics of relocating 87 people with dignity and care. By Sunday evening, the foundation had transformed the apartment building, now dubbed West Side Commons, into functional housing for 32 residents. Medical care transitions had been arranged for all who needed them. Transportation plans were in place for those moving to other shelters. Not a single resident would be left without options when the shelter closed its doors the next morning. As Marcus and Ray stood in the lobby of Westside Commons, watching families receive keys to their new apartments, the magnitude of what they'd accomplished began to sink in. We did this, Marcus said quietly. It actually made a difference. Ray nodded, his expression a complex mixture of pride and something deeper, perhaps vindication after years of being overlooked and discounted. This is just the beginning, Ray replied. These band-aids won't hold forever. We need systemic solutions, one step at a time, Marcus agreed. They were interrupted by the arrival of Alexander, who had come to witness the culmination of their efforts. He moved through the lobby, greeting new residents with respect and warmth that seemed genuine rather than performative. When a young boy shyly offered him a drawing as thanks, Alexander knelt to accept it, speaking to the child at eye level. "He's full of surprises," Ray observed. "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "He is." Later that night, as Marcus finally returned home to find Ellie asleep on the couch, a book still open on her lap, he felt a bittersweet pang. He'd been so consumed with helping others that he'd barely seen his own child all weekend. Carefully lifting her, he carried her to her bedroom, gently tucking her in without waking her. "I love you, pumpkin," he whispered, brushing a curl from her forehead. As he prepared for bed, his phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. "What you and Ray accomplished this weekend isn't just impressive, it's transformative. This is exactly why I brought you both on board. Get some rest. Tomorrow, we start thinking bigger." Marcus stared at the message, a complex emotion swelling in his chest. Pride in what they'd achieved, gratitude for the opportunity, but also a nagging question that wouldn't quite settle. How much of their success was due to Alexander's resources and influence, and how many more lives could they change with those same advantages directed by people who truly understood the problems they were trying to solve? The question followed him into dreams filled with keys and open doors, and the faces of those who, for perhaps the first time in years, had a safe place to sleep. The West Side shelter crisis marked a turning point. Word of the Foundation's swift, comprehensive response spread quickly through Chicago's social services community. What had begun as an emergency intervention became a case study in effective crisis management, with other organizations reaching out to learn from their approach. Within the Foundation itself, Marcus and Ray's standing evolved dramatically. Staff who had initially viewed them with polite skepticism now sought their input on other initiatives. Their lived experience, once considered a novel experiment in diversity, had proven its concrete value. 2 weeks after the shelter crisis, Alexander called them to his private office, a space few Foundation employees ever entered. Unlike the open, collaborative environments that characterized the rest of the building, Alexander's office reflected his corporate background: sleek, minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering commanding views of the city. "Please, sit," he invited, gesturing to a seating area arranged around a low table rather than his imposing desk. "I wanted to speak with you privately about the Foundation's next phase." Marcus and Ray exchanged curious glances as they settled into the leather chairs. "The board meeting yesterday was illuminating," Alexander continued, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "I presented the West Side intervention as a case study. The results were undeniable. Not a single resident left without stable housing options. No disruption to employment or education. Medical care continuity maintained for everyone who needed it." He leaned forward. "The directors who opposed your hiring are now your biggest advocates." "That's unexpected," Marcus admitted. "Not to me," Alexander replied. "Success is the most effective counter to skepticism." He opened a folder on the table. "Which brings me to our next challenge. The Foundation's 5-year strategic plan needs renewal. Traditionally, this would be developed by the executive team and outside consultants, then presented to the board for approval. But you want to do it differently," Ray surmised. Alexander nodded. "I want you both to lead it. A bottom-up approach that starts with the people we serve rather than administrative priorities." The proposal was as exhilarating as it was daunting. Alexander was essentially asking them to reimagine the entire Foundation's approach, a $50 million annual operation with dozens of programs and partnerships. "That's a lot of responsibility," Marcus observed carefully. "It is," Alexander agreed, "but you've earned it. More importantly, I believe you're the only ones who can truly transform how we work." His expression softened slightly. "Danny, what you did for the West Side residents, that personal, nuanced approach, that's what I've been trying to articulate for years." As they discussed the parameters of the strategic planning process, Marcus found himself increasingly convinced of Alexander's sincerity. Whatever complex motivations had initially led him to bring them on board, his commitment to meaningful change seemed genuine. After the meeting, as they rode the elevator down to the main Foundation offices, Ray broke their thoughtful silence. "You realize what's happening, right?" he asked. We're not just advisors anymore. We're becoming the public face of his redemption story. Marcus considered this. Does that bother you? Not if we're actually helping people, Ray replied pragmatically. Just means we need to keep our eyes open. Make sure we're not just window dressing for his conscience. The strategic planning process consumed their days over the next few weeks. They met with community organizations, shelter residents, housing advocates, and families struggling with instability. They conducted listening sessions in church basements and community centers, gathering insights that rarely reach the ears of Foundation executives. For Marcus, the work was deeply fulfilling, but increasingly demanding. He found himself arriving home later each evening, often after Ellie was asleep. The neighbor who had helped during the shelter crisis, Mrs. Patel, became a regular presence, ensuring Ellie had dinner and completed her homework when Marcus was delayed. One Thursday evening, after missing Ellie's science club presentation, Marcus returned home to find her still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a plate of cold dinner. "Hey, pumpkin," he greeted her, guilt stabbing through his exhaustion. "I'm so sorry about your presentation. Mrs. Patel said you did amazing." Ellie shrugged, pushing food around her plate. "It's okay. You were busy helping people." The resignation in her voice hit harder than anger would have. Marcus sat beside her, gently turning her chair to face him. "It's not okay," he said firmly. "Nothing's more important than you, not even my job." Ellie looked up, her eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond her years. "But your job helps a lot of people, like the families that moved into that building when their shelter closed." "How did you know about that?" "Mrs. Patel told me. She said you're a hero." Ellie's expression brightened slightly. "I told everyone at school my dad helps homeless people find houses." Marcus's throat tightened with emotion. "That doesn't mean I should miss your science presentation. Mom would be proud of you," Ellie said simply. "She always said we should help people when we can." The mention of Angela brought both pain and clarity. She had instilled those values in both of them: compassion, service, seeing the humanity in everyone. But she had also been fiercely present for Ellie, balancing her nursing career with unwavering attention to their daughter's needs. "I need to find a better balance," Marcus acknowledged. "Starting now. What if we have a special daddy-daughter day this Saturday? Whatever you want to do." Ellie's face lit up. "Really? The whole day? The whole day? I'll turn my phone off and everything. Can we go to the Science Museum and have ice cream for lunch?" "Absolutely." Marcus called Margaret the next morning to request the day off. Her response surprised him. "Alexander mentioned you might need some family time. He suggested we adjust your schedule to 4 days a week with the same salary. Said something about work-life balance being essential for authentic leadership." Marcus was momentarily speechless. "He said that, his exact words," Margaret confirmed. "I think losing his brother made him reflective about priorities." Meanwhile, Ray was experiencing his own evolution. With his first month's salary, he had purchased a laptop and was taking online courses to update his electrical certification. His studio apartment, initially stark and functional, gradually acquired personal touches: a small bookshelf, a comfortable reading chair, framed photographs of his daughter Leah. Most significantly, Ray had begun volunteering at a recovery center on weekends, leading job skills workshops for men transitioning from homelessness. The same straightforward, no-nonsense approach that made him effective at the Foundation resonated with men who had heard too many empty promises from well-meaning but disconnected social workers. One Sunday afternoon, as Ray was concluding a workshop on interview skills, he noticed Alexander Reed standing quietly at the back of the room. When the session ended, Alexander approached, observing the easy camaraderie between Ray and the participants. But this isn't Foundation work," Alexander noted. "No," Ray agreed. "This is personal. These guys need someone who's walked in their shoes." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "Your daughter's visit is coming up soon, isn't it?" "Christmas. 2 weeks," Ray confirmed, unable to hide his nervous anticipation. "First time I've seen her in almost 4 years. You've come a long way in a short time." Ray shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "Or just trying to become someone she won't be ashamed to call dad again." Alexander's expression revealed a flash of something deeply personal, perhaps remembering his own brother or reflecting on his own journey from poverty to wealth. "I think you're already there," he said simply. As November gave way to December, the strategic planning process gathered momentum. Marcus and Ray's approach, grounded in community input rather than abstract theories, was yielding proposals that challenged the Foundation's traditional methods. Some staff embraced the new direction enthusiastically. Others quietly resisted changes to familiar patterns. What none of them anticipated was the opposition forming outside the Foundation's walls. Powerful interests who preferred the status quo of Chicago's housing landscape and who viewed the Reed Foundation's evolving approach as a threat to their influence and profits. Snow fell in gentle flurries outside the windows of the Reed Foundation as December wrapped Chicago in its wintry embrace. The holiday season brought a festive atmosphere to the offices. A small tree in the lobby, subtle decorations in meeting rooms, and a palpable excitement for the upcoming holiday party, which would also serve as the official unveiling of the new strategic plan. For Marcus, the weeks leading up to Christmas had been a delicate balancing act. His 4-day work schedule allowed him to be present for Ellie's holiday concert and class party, but the strategic planning process still demanded intense focus. The proposal they were developing would fundamentally reshape the Foundation's approach to housing insecurity, moving from temporary interventions to long-term community investment. Not everyone was pleased with this evolution. That morning's Chicago Tribune featured an op-ed by a prominent real estate developer criticizing the Reed Foundation's naive and disruptive approach to housing. The writer argued that well-intentioned amateurs were destabilizing established systems without understanding market reality. "They're talking about us," Ray said, tossing the newspaper onto Marcus's desk. "Do the well-intentioned amateurs who don't understand real estate?" Marcus scanned the article. "Harold Grantham. Isn't he the developer who's been buying up properties in Westside and raising rents by 30%? Ray confirmed. "Our community land trust proposal would effectively block his expansion plans." The Community Land Trust was the centerpiece of their strategic plan, a mechanism for preserving affordable housing by removing land from the speculative market. The Foundation would purchase properties, place the land in a trust, and ensure the housing remained permanently affordable through resale restrictions and community governance. "Oh, he's not the only one upset," Marcus noted. "I've heard whispers that some board members think we're moving too far from traditional philanthropy." Ray shrugged, unconcerned. "Change makes people uncomfortable. Doesn't mean it's wrong." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Margaret entered, her expression unusually serious. "Alexander wants to see you both." "Now?" The tension in her voice sent a ripple of concern through Marcus. "Is something wrong?" "Just go see him," she replied, avoiding his gaze. They found Alexander in his office, standing at the window watching the snow blanket the city. When he turned to face them, his expression was unreadable. "Close the door, please," he instructed. Marcus complied, exchanging a worried glance with Ray. Had the board rejected their proposal? Had Alexander's support finally reached its limit? "I received a phone call this morning," Alexander began, his voice carefully controlled, "from Harold Grantham." Ray tensed visibly. "The developer from the op-ed." "The same," Alexander confirmed. "He had quite a lot to say about our strategic direction and about the two of you specifically." Marcus steeled himself for what was coming. In the corporate world he'd briefly inhabited before Angela's illness, he'd seen how powerful interests could undermine initiatives they perceived as threats. "He offered me a deal," Alexander continued, "quite generous, actually. His company would provide substantial funding for traditional Foundation programs, emergency shelter beds, temporary housing vouchers, the usual approach. In exchange, we would abandon the Community Land Trust initiative and, in his words, return to established best practices under appropriate leadership." The implication was clear. Marcus and Ray would be removed from their position. "How substantial?" Ray asked bluntly. $20 million over 5 years. Alexander replied, "roughly doubling our current housing budget." The sum hung in the air between them, its weight impossible to ignore. $20 million could provide immediate relief to thousands of families. "What did you tell him?" Marcus asked quietly. Alexander's expression shifted, a hint of amusement breaking through his serious demeanor. I told him to take his money and his opinions and find another foundation to manipulate. Relief washed over Marcus so intensely it was almost physical. Beside him, Ray let out a low whistle. He didn't take it well, Alexander continued. Threatened to turn other donors against us, use his influence with the city to obstruct our permits, make things difficult for the Foundation. And, Ray prompted, and I reminded him that while he may have money and political connections, I have considerably more of both. Alexander's tone was matter-of-fact, without bravado. Then I told him that the strategic direction of the Reed Foundation is not for sale, and neither are the people who lead it. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude and respect for the man before them. When they'd first met, he had seen Alexander only as a powerful billionaire extending charity from on high. Now, he recognized something more complex, a flawed but genuine ally committed to meaningful change. Thank you, Marcus said simply. Alexander dismissed the gratitude with a wave. Don't thank me yet. Grantham won't be the last to oppose what we're doing. Transformative change makes powerful enemies. We can handle opposition, Ray asserted confidently. What we're doing matters too much to back down. Alexander studied them both, satisfaction evident in his expression. That's precisely why I brought you on, not just for your insights, but for your conviction. He moved to his desk and retrieved a folder, which brings me to the real reason I called you here today. He handed the folder to Marcus. Inside was a legal document with the heading, Reed Foundation Leadership Endowment. What is this? Marcus asked, scanning the dense legal text. Security, Alexander explained. A separately governed endowment that ensures the Foundation's independence and yours, regardless of external pressures. It guarantees funding for your positions and key initiatives for the next decade, even if other revenue sources are threatened. Marcus looked up in astonishment. You're protecting us from being forced out. I'm protecting the Foundation's mission, Alexander corrected gently. You and Ray are now essential to that mission. The implications were profound. Alexander was using his wealth and influence not just to fund programs, but to create structural protections for a new approach to philanthropy, one led by people with lived experience rather than traditional credentials. There's one more thing, Alexander added, his tone softening. A personal matter? He opened his desk drawer and removed a small box wrapped in simple blue paper with a silver ribbon. For Ellie, he explained, handing it to Marcus. A holiday gift and an invitation. Invitation? My family has a tradition of hosting a Christmas Eve dinner for Foundation staff and their families. Nothing formal, just good food and better company. I'd be honored if you and Ellie would join us. He turned to Ray. You and Leah as well, of course. The gesture, so personal, so far removed from their initial employer-employee relationship, caught Marcus off guard. We'd be happy to come, he managed. As they left Alexander's office, processing the morning's revelations, Ray seemed unusually contemplative. What are you thinking? Marcus asked as they rode the elevator back to their floor. That sharing my sandwich with you was the best decision I ever made, Ray replied with a rare smile. Christmas Eve arrived with perfect holiday weather, just enough snow to transform the city into a winter wonderland without disrupting travel. Marcus and Ellie arrived at Alexander's lakefront home shortly after 7, both dressed in their holiday best. The house was grand but welcoming, with warm lights and tasteful decorations that avoided ostentation. Alexander greeted them at the door himself, dressed casually in a sweater and slacks. Welcome, he exclaimed, ushering them inside. Ellie, I've heard so much about you. Ellie, momentarily shy, offered a polite handshake. Thank you for inviting us, Mr. Reed. Please, call me Alexander, he insisted, and thank you for sharing your dad with us. He's made an incredible difference at the Foundation. The house was filled with Foundation staff and their families, the atmosphere warm and convivial. Marcus recognized faces from different departments, all mingling without the hierarchical divisions sometimes present at the office. They found Ray in the living room, standing beside a young woman whose resemblance to him was unmistakable. Leah, his daughter, who had arrived from California 2 days earlier. Their reunion had been emotional by all accounts. Years of separation, bridged by tentative steps toward reconciliation. Marcus, Ellie, Ray called, waving them over. "Meet Leah," introductions were made, and soon Ellie was chatting animatedly with Leah about school and science projects. The age difference between them, no barrier to connection. "How's it been?" Marcus asked Ray quietly, nodding toward Leah. "Complicated," Ray admitted. "Lots to heal. But we're talking, really talking." The simple statement contained volumes of meaning for a man who had spent years believing his daughter was better off without him. Dinner was served in a spacious dining room, the long table accommodating everyone comfortably. Alexander sat at the head, with Marcus and Ray placed in positions of honor near him. The meal was excellent but not extravagant, the kind of thoughtfully prepared food that invited conversation and community rather than formality. As dessert was being served, Alexander stood and gently tapped his glass for attention. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began. "The holiday season is about connection with family, with community, with purpose. Looking around this table, I'm reminded of how fortunate I am to work alongside people who share a commitment to creating a more just and compassionate city." He paused, his gaze moving deliberately to Marcus and Ray. "Some of you know that my brother Michael was lost to homelessness many years ago. His memory has driven my philanthropy, but for too long, I approached that work from a distance, writing checks but not truly engaging with the humanity at the heart of our mission." Alexander's voice wavered slightly before regaining composure. "Earlier this year, I witnessed something that changed my perspective entirely. Outside Pinnacle Tower, I saw a janitor, a man with every reason to focus solely on his own struggles, share his lunch with a homeless stranger. That simple act of recognition, of seeing another person's humanity when society had rendered him invisible, moved me profoundly." Marcus felt every eye in the room turn toward him and Ray, the significance of their first meeting now apparent to all. What Marcus and Ray have brought to the foundation isn't just their experience or insights, valuable as those are. They've brought a fundamental reminder that effective philanthropy begins with authentic human connection, with seeing people not as problems to be solved, but as partners in creating solutions. Alexander raised his glass. "So tonight, I toast not just to our work, but to the spirit that informs it, to seeing each other, to sharing what we have, to remembering that we are all fundamentally connected." As glasses were raised around the table, Marcus caught Ellie watching him with unabashed pride shining in her eyes, the same pride he had once seen in Angela's gaze. In that moment, the distance between his past as an overlooked janitor and his present as a respected foundation leader collapsed. Both were expressions of the same core values: dignity, service, compassion, that he hoped to instill in his daughter. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Alexander drew Marcus aside into his study. "I have something for you," he said, retrieving an envelope from his desk. "A personal matter, not foundation business." Marcus accepted the envelope with curiosity. Inside was a legal document and a letter. As he scanned the contents, his breath caught. "This is the remaining balance of your wife's medical bills," Alexander confirmed, "paid in full, and a college fund for Ellie, separate from your employment benefits." Marcus stared at the documents, unable to process the magnitude of the gesture. For years, Angela's medical debt had hung over him like a shadow, a constant reminder of both his loss and his inadequacy in providing for her care. "I can't accept this," he managed finally. "It's too much." "It's not charity," Alexander said firmly. "It's recognition of your value to the foundation, to the community we serve, and to me personally." His expression softened. "Michael would have been about your age now. Sometimes I wonder what kind of man he might have become, given the chance." The personal nature of the admission, so far from their initial professional relationship, broke something open in Marcus. Before he could form a response, tears were streaming down his face, years of buried grief and struggle rising to the surface. "I'm sorry," he began, embarrassed by the display. "Don't be," Alexander said quietly. "Some burdens aren't meant to be carried alone." In that moment, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and power, two men from vastly different worlds found common ground in shared humanity, one who had lost a brother, one who had lost a wife, both seeking redemption through service to others. As Marcus wiped his eyes, Composing himself, the door opened and Ellie peeked in. "Dad, are you okay?" she asked, concern in her voice. "I'm better than okay, pumpkin," he assured her, opening his arms for her to join them. "Just very grateful." As she crossed the room to embrace him, Marcus caught Alexander watching them, a complex emotion in his eyes, perhaps remembering his brother or reflecting on the unexpected connections that had brought them all to this moment. Outside, snow continued to fall on a city being quietly transformed, not just by the Reed Foundation's programs, but by the ripple effects of human connection that had begun with a simple shared lunch on an autumn day.